Welcome to Cheap Talk, where we turn everyday struggles into meaningful chats. Ever feel like your learning mojo vanished after school? Like picking up a new language or skill suddenly feels like climbing Mount Everest?
Totally. It's like my brain turned to mush. I used to devour books. Now I struggle to finish a chapter. Is it just me, or is adulting ruining our ability to learn?
Right? So we dove into Ulrich Boser's book, Learn Better, and it turns out it's not just us. It's a common misconception that learning is a kid's game. Boser argues that adults can learn efficiently, we just need the right approach.
Oh, so there's hope. Tell me more.
See, many of us fall into the trap of equating learning with memorization. We cram, highlight everything, and try to absorb every single detail. But Boser says true learning is more about understanding, connecting the dots, not just rote memorization.
So, like, instead of cramming vocabulary, I should focus on understanding the grammar and how the language works? Make sense?
Exactly. It's about seeing the bigger picture. Boser outlines 4 key steps for effective learning: motivation, goal setting, practice and self-testing, and making connections.
Okay, break that down for me. Motivation, I get that. Gotta have a reason to learn something, right? Like, I want to learn Spanish so I can order tacos like a pro. What about the rest?
So goals should be specific, measurable. Learn Spanish is vague. Master 50 new verbs this week. Now that's a goal. Then the practice and self-testing part, crucial. We got to actively engage with the material, quiz ourselves, see what sticks.
So, flashcards, practice conversations, the whole shebang?
Yeah, and don't be afraid to make mistakes. They're part of the process. Finally, connect what you're learning to what you already know. It's like building a mental web. The more connections, the stronger the learning.
So, if I'm learning about, say, photography, I should connect it to my understanding of light, composition, maybe even art history?
Precisely. That's how you make the knowledge truly yours. Boser also talks about mindset. Believing you can learn is half the battle. A positive outlook, embracing challenges, these things make a huge difference.
That's encouraging. I'm starting to feel like I can actually learn new things again. So, it's not about age, it's about approach. I like that.
So we've talked about the importance of understanding over memorization, right? But how do we actually do that? Boser gives us a pretty solid framework, actually. He breaks it down into 4 steps.
4 steps? Okay, I'm listening. Lay it on me.
First, you got to find your why. What's your motivation? Why do you even want to learn this thing? It could be anything, right? From I want to get a promotion to I'm just curious.
Yeah. Like, my motivation for learning to cook was purely survival. I was tired of takeout, but hey, it worked.
Exactly. The why is key. Boser says knowing the value of what you're learning makes you way more likely to stick with it. So next, set specific goals, like really specific. Learn Spanish is too vague. Learn 50 new Spanish verbs this month. Now that's a goal.
Okay, so motivation and concrete goals. Got it. What's next?
Practice and self-testing. This is where the real learning happens. We got to actively engage, quiz ourselves, see what we actually know.
Oh, so like flashcards, practice conversations, the whole 9 yards?
Exactly. And don't be afraid to mess up. Mistakes are like totally part of the process. And finally, connect what you're learning to what you already know. It's like building a mental web, more connections, stronger the learning.
So it's all about making it relevant, making those connections, and actually putting in the work. I like that. It's practical advice. No brain mush required.
So we're talking about how to really learn something, not just memorize it, right? Like how do we actually make that knowledge stick?
Yeah, exactly. It's like I can read a self-help book, feel all inspired, and then poof, a week later, I can't remember a thing.
Right? Boser talks about this. It's not enough to just learn a new skill or concept in isolation. We have to connect it to what we already know, build those mental links. He uses the example of, say, learning about attachment styles like anxious preoccupied attachment.
Oh, interesting example. So it's not enough to just label yourself. You have to understand why you developed that attachment style, how it affects your relationships, and all that.
Precisely. You got to connect it to your understanding of relationships, family dynamics, all that stuff. Otherwise, knowing you're anxious preoccupied doesn't really help you change anything.
That makes total sense. It's like, okay, I'm this attachment type. Now what? The connections, give it context, make it actionable, right?
Exactly. And Boser says these connections actually help us remember things better too. Like, even if you forget the specifics, you can kind of reconstruct the knowledge because you remember how it relates to other things.
Oh, that's cool. Like, it's all part of a bigger web, so even if one thread breaks, you can still find your way back.
Exactly. It's like having a mental map. Now, another thing Boser talks about is mindset. Apparently, people with a positive outlook tend to learn better. They're more engaged, more likely to persevere through challenges.
That's interesting. So if you believe you can learn, you're more likely to actually learn. It's like a self-fulfilling prophecy, yeah?
Right. It's all connected. Believing in your ability to learn makes you more invested in the process, more likely to push through those frustrating moments when you feel like giving up. It's not just about IQ or natural talent, it's about believing you can grow and improve.
So positive self-talk. I can do this. That actually makes a difference. I gotta try that. It's way more motivating than just beating myself up when things get tough, right?
So, we were talking about mindset and how it affects learning, right? Well, it turns out open-mindedness plays a huge role. Like people who are less prejudiced, more accepting of different things, they tend to learn better. Hmm.
Oh, really? That makes sense, I guess. Less mental baggage to weigh you down, yeah?
Exactly. The book mentions how our emotions, like our personal preferences, can impact how effectively we learn something. They use the example of learning a language. Say you dislike a certain country,
You'll probably have a harder time learning their language.
spot on, because every time you study, you might subconsciously connect it with those negative feelings. And who wants that? So you might, without even realizing it, start avoiding the language altogether.
It's like your brain's trying to protect you from the discomfort, right? Avoidance as a coping mechanism. Interesting.
Exactly. So the more open-minded you are, the less these biases get in the way, and the easier it is to absorb new information. It's like clearing the path for knowledge, you know?
Yeah, that makes total sense. So less judgment, more learning. Got it. What else does the book talk about in terms of mindset?
Well, another big one is accepting that you will make mistakes. Like, it's inevitable, right? But how we deal with those mistakes, that's what matters. Hmm.
Oh, right. Like, are you the type to beat yourself up over every little slip up, or do you see it as a learning opportunity?
Exactly. And the book talks about self-testing. Remember how crucial it is for effective learning? Well, some people avoid it, not because they don't understand the benefits, but because they're terrified of facing their mistakes. It's like if I don't test myself, I can pretend I know it all, right?
Yeah, I totally get that. It's easier to bury your head in the sand than confront your shortcomings, but that just sets you up for failure in the long run, doesn't it?
Totally. If you're not willing to face your errors, you lose the chance to actually learn from them. And then guess what? You're more likely to keep making the same mistakes over and over again. It becomes this vicious cycle. So, yeah, embracing mistakes, seeing them as part of the process, that's a biggie.
So, open mindedness, accepting mistakes, it's all about creating a positive learning environment internally, yeah? Like setting yourself up for success by having the right attitude?
So, we were talking about mindset and how important it is for learning, but you know what else is huge? Sleep. Like, seriously, I was reading this thing about how people who get enough sleep actually learn better. Crazy, right?
Oh, really? I mean, it makes sense. If you're exhausted, you can't focus, right? Like, my brain is basically mush after a bad night's sleep.
Totally. But it's not just about being more alert and focused, although that's definitely part of it. Apparently, there's a lot going on in our brains while we sleep, especially when it comes to learning. Like, our brains aren't just chilling out, they're actively processing information.
Oh, so like those late night study sessions aren't actually helping? I should just hit the hay instead?
Well, the research suggests that sleep plays a crucial role in consolidating memories, yeah? Like moving information from short-term to long-term storage.
So, like, while I'm snoozing, my brain is filing away all the stuff I learned that day? That's pretty cool.
Yeah, there's this whole thing about the hippocampus, where short-term memories are stored, and the cortex, which handles long-term memory. And during sleep, these two parts of the brain are like talking to each other, transferring information.
Oh, interesting. So it's like a nightly data transfer, backing up all the new stuff onto the hard drive?
Exactly. And the cool thing is, during this transfer process, the brain isn't just passively storing the new information, it's actively connecting it to what you already know, integrating it into your existing knowledge base. It's like building a mental web, right? More connections, stronger the understanding.
So that's why sometimes you wake up and something you were struggling with the day before suddenly makes sense, like your brain's been working on it in the background?
Exactly. This study by Tamminen in 2010, I think it was, actually talks about this, how sleep can lead to a deeper understanding of new concepts. It's like your brain is making those connections while you're unconscious, and then, bam, you wake up with this new insight. Pretty amazing, huh? So we've talked about mindset, sleep, all these things that affect how we learn. But you know what else is super important? This thing called metacognition.
Meta what now? Sounds complicated.
It's not, actually. It just means thinking about thinking, like being aware of how you're learning, not just what you're learning.
Oh, okay. So like reflecting on your own thought process, yeah?
Exactly. And Bozer says people who are good at this metacognition thing, they tend to learn better because they can, like, adjust their approach as they go. You know, if something's not working, they can switch it up.
That makes sense. Instead of just banging your head against the wall, you take a step back and think, maybe there's a better way to do this.
Right. And there are two types of metacognition, apparently, planning and monitoring, or something like that. Planning is all about like strategizing before you start learning, asking yourself questions like, what's the best way for me to learn this?
So, like, should I read a book, watch a video, take a class, that kind of thing?
Yeah, exactly. And also, like, thinking about what you already know, what you need to know, and how to bridge that gap. It's all about being proactive, you know? And then there's the monitoring part. That's where you check in with yourself during the learning process. Like, is this making sense? Am I retaining this information? Do I need to go back and review something?
So it's like constantly evaluating your understanding, making sure you're on the right track?
Exactly. And Bozer says the best learners are always doing this, whether they realize it or not. They're constantly asking themselves questions, testing their knowledge, making sure they really get it. Hmm.
Oh, that's cool. So it's not just about being smart, it's about being aware of how you're being smart, right? Like maximizing your learning potential by being mindful of the process?
Precisely. And the good news is metacognition is a skill you can develop. Like the more you practice it, the better you get at it. And Bozer says it's especially important for beginners because like if you learn how to learn effectively early on, it'll pay off big time in the long run.
That makes a lot of sense. So, how do we actually practice metacognition? Like, are there any specific exercises or techniques we can use?
So we've talked about mindset, sleep, metacognition, all these things that affect how we learn. But you know what else can really supercharge your learning? Finding the value in what you're learning.
Oh, yeah? Like, how does that work?
Well, it's like this. If you see how the stuff you're learning can actually benefit your life, your work, whatever, you're way more motivated to stick with it, right? Hmm.
That makes sense. Like, if I'm learning a new software, but I can't see how I'll ever use it, I'm probably not going to put in the effort, yeah?
Exactly. So the book suggests like really thinking about the practical applications like, okay, I'm learning this statistics software. Where in my work or even my personal life could I actually use this thing?
Oh, interesting. So, it's about connecting the learning to real world scenarios. The more specific, the better, I imagine?
Totally. The more vividly you can picture yourself using this new knowledge or skill, the more you buy into its value. It's like, oh, I can totally see how this will help me with X, Y, and Z. Suddenly, it's not just some abstract concept anymore. It's a tool, you know?
Yeah, I get it. It's like learning a new language. If you can imagine yourself ordering food in a foreign country or chatting with locals, that's way more motivating than just memorizing vocabulary lists, right?
Exactly. It's all about finding that why. And speaking of motivation, you know what else can be surprisingly effective? Peer pressure.
Hmm. Peer pressure? Really? I thought that was like a bad thing.
Well, it can be, yeah. But it can also be a powerful motivator. Like the book mentions this study where people who shared their learning goals with their friends were more likely to actually achieve those goals. It's like accountability, you know?
Oh, that's interesting. So it's like if I tell everyone I'm going to learn to play the guitar, I'm more likely to actually practice because I don't want to look like a slacker?
Exactly. Nobody wants to be the person who doesn't follow through, right? So it's like, okay, I got to prove to my friends and myself that I can do this. And there's another cool thing about this peer pressure thing.
What's that?
Apparently, taking a class with a friend can also boost your performance. Like, you're less likely to slack off if you know your buddy is right there with you, seeing how you're doing.
Oh, that makes sense. It's like friendly competition almost. Like, I can't let my friend get a better grade than me.
So, we've been talking about all these ways to boost our learning, right? Mindset, sleep, metacognition. But you know what else is surprisingly powerful? Asking yourself why and how.
Oh, yeah? Like questioning what you're learning. I guess that makes sense. Helps you really dig into the material, right?
Exactly. There's this cognitive psychologist, Art Gracer, and he found that when people ask themselves why and how questions during the learning process, they end up with a way deeper, more accurate understanding of the material.
Oh, that's cool. So, like, instead of just passively absorbing information, you're actively engaging with it, yeah?
Precisely. They give this example. Like if you read low self-esteem affects our intimate relationships, you could ask yourself, how does low self-esteem affect how I interact with others?
Right. Forces you to think about it more deeply instead of just accepting the statement at face value.
Exactly. And when you actually think about the how, you come up with all these like specific examples, personal connections. It's way more meaningful than just a general statement about intimate relationships, you know?
Yeah, totally. It's like you're personalizing the information, making it relevant to your own life. Makes it stick better, I bet.
Totally. And another thing they talk about is self-testing. Like after you've learned something, quiz yourself. Do I really understand this concept? And then try to explain it in your own words. Compare it to the examples in the book. Really see if you've got it.
Oh, that's a good one. Self-testing. It's like holding yourself accountable, yeah? Making sure you're not just fooling yourself into thinking you understand something when you really don't.
Exactly. And you know what else is really effective? teaching what you've learned to someone else.
Oh, interesting. Like explaining it to a friend who doesn't know anything about the topic?
Yeah, apparently when you teach something, you have to really organize the information in your head, pick out the important bits, and then explain it in a way that someone else can understand. It's like a supercharged form of learning.
Oh, that makes total sense. If you can't explain it clearly, you probably don't really understand it yourself, right? It's like that famous Einstein quote or something.
So we've been talking about all these different learning strategies, right? But you know what really struck me? This idea of connecting new information to what you already know, like really integrating it into your existing knowledge base.
Oh, yeah? That sounds kind of obvious. Like, isn't that just how learning works?
Well, yeah, I guess so. But the way they talk about it in the book, it's not just about passively absorbing new info. It's about actively making those connections, weaving it into the fabric of what you already understand.
Oh, I see what you mean. So it's not just about adding new files to your mental hard drive, it's about like reorganizing the whole system, integrating the new stuff seamlessly.
Exactly. It's like if you just memorize a bunch of facts, they're just kind of floating around in your head, disconnected. But if you can link them to something you already understand, they become part of a larger framework, more meaningful, easier to remember.
Right, right. Like it's the difference between just knowing the definition of a word and actually being able to use it in a sentence, you know? Like truly understanding its nuances, its connections to other words.
Exactly. And the book mentions this thing about how our brains are wired to make connections, like it's what they do. So if we actively try to make those connections while we're learning, we're working with our brains, not against them.
Oh, that's interesting. So it's like we're tapping into our brain's natural learning process, maximizing its efficiency, yeah?
Precisely. And they give this example about learning a new language. Like if you just memorize vocabulary lists, you might be able to parrot back the words, but you won't really understand them.
Right. You got to connect them to the grammar, the culture, the context, all that stuff, yeah?
Exactly. It's all connected, right? And another thing they talked about was how making these connections can actually help us solve problems more effectively. Like if you've got this rich network of interconnected knowledge, you can draw on it in new and creative ways.
Oh, that's cool. So it's like the more connections you have, the more flexible your thinking becomes, yeah? More adaptable to new situations.
Exactly. It's like having a mental map. So we've covered a lot of ground, right? From mindset and sleep to the importance of connecting new information to what we already know. Anything else from the book that really jumped out at you?
Well, I think the whole thinking about thinking thing, that metacognition stuff, was really interesting. It's like we don't often stop to think about how we're learning. We just kind of do it. But being more deliberate about the process, that's where the real magic happens, I think.
Totally. Like being aware of your own learning style, your strengths and weaknesses, that can make a huge difference. And the book gives some practical tips on how to actually do that, which is great.
Yeah, exactly. It's not just theoretical, it's actionable advice. Like the stuff about asking yourself why and how questions, that's something I can start doing right away.
Totally. And another thing I really appreciated was how the book emphasized the importance of value, like finding the value in what you're learning. Because if you don't see the point, why bother, right?
Right. Motivation is key. And connecting the learning to real world scenarios, that's huge. Makes it so much more relevant?
Totally. And one last thing, the book mentions this study by Tamminen in 2010, I think it was, about how sleep spindles are linked to integrating new memories with existing knowledge. Pretty cool, huh?
Oh, yeah. Like our brains are literally making those connections while we sleep. It's like a nightly download session. So, getting enough sleep, that's not just about feeling rested, it's about actually consolidating what we've learned.
Exactly. So to wrap things up, if you're feeling like your learning mojo has vanished, don't despair. It's not about age, it's about approach. With the right mindset, the right strategies, and a good night's sleep, we can all learn better. Thanks for tuning into Cheap Talk, folks. Remember to subscribe for more candid, lighthearted discussions with a sprinkle of psychology. Catch you next time.
And don't forget to check out Ulrich Boser's book, Learn Better, for more practical tips on how to unlock your learning potential. See ya!